You know that phrase, creatures of habit? Well, it's definitely true. We are creatures of habit, and everything that we do is habitual. This means that when something happens, our nervous system turns on and pushes us down this pathway when we can get stuck there and believe that that's who we are. This is when it becomes a problem. Hello, it's Charlotte from Thrive Wellness. How are all of you doing today? Hope you're having a great week, and I would love to hear who's joining me today. What I wanted to talk about today are some secrets of NLP. For those of you who aren't familiar, NLP stands for Neuro Linguistic Programming, and we are going to talk a lot about habits and behaviors because that is one of the best things that NLP can be used for. And it also allows us to be able to unwind beliefs about ourselves and our behaviors because we can use these by breaking down our strategies to figure out how we can change these pathways. I'll get into that in a second. Let me know if you have any idea what I'm talking about so far or if this is all new to you. So today we are going to talk about the model that's used in neurolinguistic programming, this model of communication, and how you can use this model to start to reprogram the way that you think. Now, again, this process of looking at human thought is how the mind expresses itself and creates your lived experiences. Who here wants to live with less stress and greater calm? Maybe you'd like to feel more effective at work or as a parent. Perhaps you'd like to be able to stand up for yourself and speak a boundary so that you're not working multiple double shifts in the same week. Because that's pretty exhausting, and as much as maybe you'd like to be a great staff member, it might be doing so at the expense of your own health. Who wants to be able to find the motivation to start up a new exercise program or to eat better or to learn a new language or sport or activity, instrument? Anybody here want to make some fun changes in their lives? If you do, stay tuned because NLP has the power to let you do that. At its core, NLP, neuro linguistic programming, is the study of how we process information and we use that information to create our experiences. By breaking down this process, we can start to use the power of NLP to reshape our beliefs and mindsets, which pave the way for us to live the lives that we truly desire. You deserve that. I deserve that. Everybody deserves that opportunity. So, how exactly can we use NLP to make these shifts and leverage that information? We are going to look at the NLP model of communication first because that sheds light on how we receive and interpret these external inputs from our environment, and then what happens in that decision making interpretation process. When we look at the threat bucket, often we're changing the inputs to the system. NLP is a really cool way to change that nebulous inner decision making interpretation process. So, from an input to interpretation to creating an output, these things are what our nervous system does really well. And we can use our tools as our inputs to kind of calm the system. And then with NLP, when we can access the unconscious mind, we have a huge amount of influence over what happens here to lead us into a behavior. It means that when you get triggered by something, maybe it's somebody cutting you off in traffic or your boss looking at you in a certain way that makes you nervous about what they're about to ask you to do or how many more hours they're going to request that you work. Those triggers won't necessarily need to lead you to the same result, which is pretty amazing because it gives us a lot of agency and control back in our lives, which is what so many of us, I think, these days feel is lacking. So, what I'd like to do here is talk about how to prime your neurology to make positive change, and then discuss some strategies to use NLP that enhance your ability to communicate with the people around you. Even though we share 99.9% of the same DNA with anyone that we meet, our minds and the way that we think can be vastly different. Maybe you have a family member or a sibling whose DNA is virtually identical to yours, but they couldn't be a more different person from you. So, what I want to take into account are the filters that we use to interpret the information that comes in, because that is what we can change here. So, we get some input into our system. We're just going to call this our visual, auditory, kinesthetic, what we're feeling, and our olfactory, our sense of smell, as well as our gustatory, so what we're tasting. And then that goes into our various receptors, and our brain takes in all of this information. And it's a lot of information, like 2 million pieces of information a second. It's way too much for us to do anything with. So our filters allow us to delete, distort, and generalize this information down to 134 bits per second so that we can process that in our conscious minds. From there, we get this chunking effect so that our brain doesn't have to do all of this processing, even with that much information, and it brings it down to 7 chunks of information. So instead of looking at a table and going, okay, the color is brown, that must be made of wood, it's shiny, so there's some kind of whatever paint or something on it, and it has 4 legs, and there are some chairs around it, our brain takes all of that and goes, table. And then it's easier for us to conceptualize. We might not remember all the details, at least not consciously, but we know that it's a table, and we are taking in enough information about it to know that it's, slotted into our everyday category of this is what a table looks like. So that would count as an internal representation, or the words, images, sounds, smells, tastes, touch, sensations that we use to describe all of these input systems. So when I ask you to think of a table and you then described that table to me, that would be your internal representation of a table. And this goes for everything, every concept, every item, object that you can think of. We have some kind of construct in our mind of what that is, and that is how we use words to be able to describe our inner experience to other people. And that's how we create our subjective experience. We have so much information coming in, and these filters allow us to really break it down. It's definitely subjective because we can't possibly have absolute access to everything that's going on in our environment all the time. This is why one of the NLP presuppositions or assumptions that I really appreciate is that the map is not the territory. And this means that the internal representations that I make about one event are not the event itself. And if you go to the same event, you will probably make different internal representations about that event too. They are not going to be the same. However, what does happen the same for both of us is that when we run this external event, maybe it's watching this video, maybe it's going to work today or driving somewhere, when we run the external events through our internal processing systems, and then we create that, piece of information so that we can then remember it and recall it, that event is also combined with our physiology or our inner state to create some kind of output or behavior. So again, we're using NLP to break down how our brain does habits or behaviors. Good morning, Sharon. How are you? Nice to see you here. If we think of that strategy, again, we are taking a trigger. Let's say for fun, the trigger is your phone buzzing. When that happens, something happens within your brain. Maybe you get a picture of the phone pop up, or a thought, I should get that, or a feeling like, oh, maybe something happens in your stomach and you're then this leads to an emotion. Maybe the emotion is anticipation. You've been waiting for a message or an email. Or maybe it's dread. You've been waiting for a message or an email about your taxes. And then it leads us into a behavior. Maybe you check your phone if it's something you've been really looking forward to, or maybe you leave it there. What we want to do using NLP, if these behaviors are no longer serving you, is to start with the trigger, then figure out what happens next, and what happens next as the output or the behavior so that we can break that chain of events. And it's really cool. There are some awesome techniques that we can use that do exactly that. So that brings us to why NLP works so well, which is because it takes advantage of neuroplasticity, which is our brain's really amazing ability to adapt, reorganize, and change throughout our lives so that we can learn and experience our environment differently. And it's a really positive thing to hear. At least this was amazing for me to hear. Our ability to have positive or negative neuroplastic adaptation continues for the rest of our lives. The only reason why it looks like we stop learning when we're older is because we generally need novel stimulus to learn. So if people are, in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, and they've already been exposed to a lot of information in the decades previously, they just need new stimulus, and that will prompt their brains to be able to learn and to be able to adapt. So it's never too late. You are always in a place where you can learn and you can challenge your brain to, change its structures, form new neural synapses, and, let other connections that aren't the pathways that you would like to be using kind of wither away or atrophy so that we can start to build new ones using different neurons or nerves. And again, with NLP, because we can use different techniques to reframe, visualize, there's a process called creating an anchor. All of these things take advantage of the fact that our neurology is plastic and changeable, and that allows us to facilitate personal growth as well as these behavioral modifications. Another really cool thing about NLP is its ability to allow us to enhance our communication and our influence over other people. So I've talked a little bit about the internal representation systems, and primarily people tend to be visual, auditory, auditory digital, or kinesthetic. So if I were a visual person, I would tend to use words like, I see, look at that, picture this. Whereas if I were more of an auditory person, I might say things like, I hear you, that resonates with me, listen to this. Are you getting the gist here? For an auditory digital, this is someone who kind of thinks more. So it might be, I think, I know, let's interpret, let's break this down. It's more of an information processing type of person. I would relate to this for myself as well as the auditory. Anyway, the kinesthetic person tends to speak a little more slowly. They might be a bit more thoughtful. They feel things. Things are touching. There's generally more communication or more, I would say, um, in being in touch or in tune with their bodies and the felt senses within their bodies. So there's no right or wrong, there's no better internal representation system to have. We use all of them. We just have a tendency to use one more than another depending on our experiences and what's worked well for our brains in the past. So, part of what's kind of fun in NLP is that you start to notice things like this. And this can really help you to build rapport with the people around you. So, if you know, for example, that someone around you tends to be more visual, you can start using more visual language with them. Maybe they are struggling with something and they don't know how to do it, and you know that just explaining it verbally isn't really going to help them. So perhaps you draw some pictures or diagrams, or you show them images, or you describe things using that visual language. That is going to be really helpful in allowing them to be on the same page as you are. Same thing goes for like an auditory learner. I have enjoyed listening to podcasts and picking out language that the hosts are using. A lot of them will be like, yeah, that sounds good. Oh, that really resonates with me. And just like so many things, we self select into the areas that we are comfortable with and that our nervous system likes. So it's my guess that a lot of those people are auditory driven. And so you can pick up on what they're doing. I mean, they're leading a podcast, they're speaking, they're using words. Maybe they are also auditory digital because they're taking in information, interpreting it, and then bringing others along on this journey with them. I do think that if you thought about yourself, maybe consider when you search out information, do you prefer listening to it? Maybe you prefer reading it from a book, so that could be a mix of auditory, digital, and visual. Or do you prefer watching it on YouTube, for example? Or maybe you prefer having the lived experience of going through whatever it is that you'd like to learn more about. Just some food for thought with you. The other part about how NLP can really improve your communication with other people is because you can use it to build what we call rapport. And when we build rapport with people, essentially we're helping them to like us more. People are drawn to like, and that means that when people are more like each other, they are more likely to like each other and each other's company. And from a basic standpoint, with just the words that we're using, as well as our eye contact, our body position, our facial expression, and our gestures, we can start to match these things to the people that we're communicating with. And it's more likely that we'll make them comfortable when we're doing that. So, this is another cool way to use NLP to start bridging that gap. And there are also, as a side note, things called mirror neurons that allow us to pick up on what's going on in our environment. And if you, I would suggest that if you're in a big Zoom meeting or a big online meeting, just look at the people on the screen, and you might notice that some of them are going like this, or maybe listening like this. Watch for similarities in the people in common spaces, because that mirroring and matching can happen at a very unconscious level, which is quite fun as an observer to see. I would like to note though that NLP is not meant to be used as a technique for deception or manipulation. One of the main concepts of NLP is this idea of ecology, which is, yes, creating the changes and the outcomes that you want in your life. However, you're doing it in an ecologically responsible way, which means for the greater good. So even if you benefit, it's not your benefit at the detriment of other people or your community or the world. Ideally, you're using this to, raise everybody up at the same time, and it's not just to use it to your own advantage. With great power comes great responsibility. Keep that in mind. So, with all of that said, I would like you to drop any questions that you have. I would be really curious to hear what you think. We've talked a little bit today about how to leverage NLP to start changing our beliefs and mindsets, knowing that strategy breakdown that I talked about in a high level. And this allows us to pave the way for the lives that we truly desire. So you have a better idea now of that NLP model of communication, how we can start to take advantage of our neurology to create positive change, that positive neuroplasticity, and also a couple strategies to keep in mind that will enhance your ability to communicate with and affect those around you. If this little taster has piqued your interest, then I'm excited to announce that my next round of Rewired for Resilience is going to be chock full of this NLP goodness. With the addition of NLP, along with all of the nervous system regulation techniques, I know it's going to be even more powerful than before and impactful on your life. It's going to include clearing negative emotions and beliefs, as well as reprogramming our brains for positivity and certainty around the values and goals that are important to you. All of this will leave you feeling energized, empowered, fulfilled in the work that you do, and if you desire, having more freedom to spend the time and energy with the people that are important to you in your life, and feeling again empowered in knowing that you can create the life that you want to with tools that you already have inside of you, which I think is the best part. So if you are at all curious, I would love to hear from you. Please don't hesitate to send me a message. I'm happy to jump on a call and chat. And with that, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and weekend, and I look forward to chatting with you soon. Bye.